right, so yeah, again, my thanks to be a part of this, and I'm here to talk in broad strokes about what it is to be a manuscript reviewer. The These are my disclosures. The primary thing is that, as Ann mentioned, I am the section editor for Spine now for the Red Journal, and I'm an editorial board member for a number of other journals and ad hoc reviewer for other journals as well. So that's sort of where my point of view comes from. Um, uh, the, um, what we're talking about today is peer review, and our own Nelson Oyashika from the Red Journal discussed this about 5-6 years ago in the role of neurosurgery journals in evidence-based neurosurgical care. And how they define peer review was that it's a selected panels of knowledgeable and dedicated individuals who are highly versed in the academic process and the given topic. And as you're going to hear throughout the day today, those are two key elements, both content experts and scientific process experts. And that ultimately peer review is meant to serve to safeguard the quality of the literature. It is an important role that serves as the foundation for vetting the quality of the manuscripts that are submitted for publication. And although it's come under some attack in recent years, it does remain the primary method by which we select papers for publication. Ultimately, this is a volunteer role for the most part. And you really are serving the academic community, the providers who are reading your manuscripts, the patients who are receiving the care, and in a way, society at large. So it's an important role, albeit a volunteer one. And I think the key thing to remember is that when you're approaching peer review is that you're critiquing without criticizing. I was taught, even as a resident, that your primary goal as a peer reviewer is to figure out a way to help the authors produce a manuscript that merits publication in some way. So you're really there to help them along as best you can to get them to a publishable manuscript if possible. And so when we talk about deliverables and thinking about my editorial role and what I look for from reviewers is you're looking for reviewers who understand and are often expert in the topic studied. And you're not necessarily the world's expert, but you definitely are familiar with the topic. But you also understand principles of study design and statistical analysis. And you don't have to be a statistician, obviously, and statisticians are available for reviewing manuscripts all the time, but you have to have a basic understanding. We're also seeking reviewers who are thorough and thoughtful in their reviews. Cursory reviews that don't really put the manuscript in context or consequence can be frustrating. And so taking time to be thorough and thoughtful goes a long way towards useful reviews. We're also looking for reviewers who complete their reviews in a timely manner. Timely manuscript review is crucial because the big push over many recent years has been to reduce the time for manuscript submission to first reviews. And so waiting on delayed reviews can make authors frustrated, and then ultimately the editors frustrated. Neither of those is a great thing. We're looking for reviewers who can provide insights regarding the manuscript that assist both the editor to make a decision about the manuscript and the authors to help them make a better manuscript, as I was saying earlier, and I'll repeat throughout this talk. And we're also looking for reviewers who issue argumentative or self-promoting reviews. We don't need the reviewers to ask the authors to cite all of the reviewers' publications on the topic. We want constructive criticism to, as we said, to help produce a useful manuscript. It's important to think about when you become a reviewer, you're going to be asked to select your specific topics of interest. You want to be honest about those. This is my list of topics for neurosurgery, but you'll go down the whole hierarchy. Unfortunately, it's not presenting right, but the whole hierarchy of topics in neurosurgery, for example, and then within those, the subtopics, and you can click all these boxes and your list can become pages long. But you really want to think about not just what you are an expert in or knowledgeable about, but also what you're interested in reviewing, because the editors will select reviewers based on these specific topics. And if you're not interested in reading papers about a specific topic, then don't select that area of interest. So it's worth taking time to be honest and upfront about this so that you are reviewing manuscripts that you're actually interested in reading. And so once you do get an invitation to review a manuscript, this is sort of the checklist in my head about whether you should accept the invitation to review. It's not necessarily automatic. As we just mentioned, you want to be familiar with the subject matter so that you can comment meaningfully on what they've presented. You also want to assess for an absence of any conflict of interest or bias with the material, or perhaps the likely authors, which even in a blinded process can sometimes be inferred. And it's important to ask yourself if you complete the review by the deadline. As we said, timely reviews are crucial. And if you think you can't get it done, you should be honest with yourself about that. And so that if you answer no to any of those above questions, it's probably best to decline the invitation. And what's very helpful for editors is if you can think of someone who would be a good substitute reviewer, is to provide that reviewer's name and their email so that we can expedite the process in getting a new reviewer if you were unable to complete the review for whatever reason. And so as we talk about how to approach a manuscript, you're going to hear a lot of detail from Drs. Wong and Dr. McCracken about sort of the granular aspects of reviewing a manuscript. And I just wanted to talk about sort of this in as I said, a broad way, thinking about the principles that go behind a good peer review. And so the first thing is thinking about the manuscript as a whole and the message it's sending. That's really presented in the abstract and the introduction and the discussion. And first thing you do have to ask yourself is, does this manuscript belong in this journal? And that has a number of different aspects to it. Number one is the easy one is this manuscript of interest to the readership of the journal? It may be esoteric and sort of an interesting scientific question, but if the readers of the journal aren't interested in it, then it may not be the right place for it to be published. And the other issue is the quality of the manuscript up to the general quality of the manuscripts that are routinely published in that journal. And then you want to have a sense that there's an overarching message that's clear in the article. And essentially, is there a narrative told from start to finish that the reader then comes away with a message that they can take into practice or take to their patients or their colleagues that is clear and concise. And then finally, you want to ask, is the manuscript going to add substantively to the current literature? And that takes on a lot of different aspects as I've listed here. You know, as a useful a manuscript or manuscript of value to the literature can be one that presents novel findings, which are always interesting, as a validation of prior findings. And all too often we get reviewers who say, well, this has been previously published, doesn't need to be published again. But in fact, as we know, the reiteration of published work or published findings, I should say, is a key part of the scientific process. And so I think there's value to those types of papers as well. We all know there's a paucity of negative studies in the literature, and so it's worth considering a negative study as one that can add useful information to the literature. And then also one that papers that can act as a spur to future research studies. So either preliminary findings or a pilot study, ones that go to other investigators to produce good work in the future can also be of value. And then the second aspect of manuscript review is thinking about the meat of the paper, the scientific part of the paper, the methods, results, and conclusions. And really the first thing is to ask yourself, did the authors achieve what they set out to do? Were there well-defined goals of the study? Did they have an appropriate population and study design, as we'll hear about? Was the study successfully executed in the way that they set out to do it? And was there an appropriate analysis, statistical and otherwise? And perhaps the most important part really is, was there a judicious drawing of inferences and conclusions? And is that presented in a way that the reader can understand it? And this is, I say, one of the most frequent sources for critiques and papers being sent back for revision or rejected, is that the authors didn't make it clear how they got to the conclusions they got to, or they overreach in the inferences that they draw from the data available. And again, does the manuscript tell a plausible story? In other words, when this gets published, is it going to be something that's going to be understandable, acceptable, and make sense to the readership? And then finally, again, at the end of it all, ask yourself again, does this manuscript belong in this particular journal, or is it better suited somewhere else?